So good morning and welcome to our sixth Journey Through Loss video series. And I thank you for spending this morning with me. What we did last time is we spoke about the unexpected gifts that the journey through loss can give to us. And so today what we're talking about is the unexpected difficulties that one might come across. So I debated long and hard as to whether I should discuss this because it is quite personal and it can be a bit uncomfortable for me. But then I thought there are lots of people who could benefit from what I'm having to say, what story I'm telling. And so I've decided just to jump right in. I also would like to really heap a lot of kudos on my husband, Mike, because he is very happy that we share our story, warts and all, so that if it helps one person who's maybe suffering from the same things that we are, then we will have achieved our goal. So even though at times it's not pretty, as I've said before, grief is a messy journey. And even though at times, my husband has really battled, I really appreciate the courage that he takes every day and the courage to allow us actually to share our story. So before we start, I would just like to share with you two comments that arose as a result of the last video, which I thought were particularly good. The first one is saying, the one thing I learned through my grief period was how strong I really am, which left me with a feeling that I'm able to cope with more than I ever thought I would. So that's wonderful. What she's saying is she discovered that she had emotional resilience when maybe she didn't know whether she had it or not. So thank you for that comment, Helen. The next comment reads as follows. In the loss of my brother and father, what really helped speed up our healing was looking for the unexpected gifts. And as I said last time, those gifts can they warm your soul, they warm your heart. And it does certainly help you feel that little bit better, which starts you on your road to healing. Right, so let's dig right in. First of all, I just want to say that not everybody will have these same unexpected difficulties. I want to remind you once again that the grief journey is a very personal one and everybody experiences it in a difficult way. So I'm speaking from our personal perspective. These are the difficulties that we experienced. So the first one is a very unexpected difficulty in the fact that we lost relationships with special family and friends. And this was a very unexpected difficulty or hardship. We were kind of expecting that the people who were special in our lives would really stand with us. And initially, that certainly was the case. The support was amazing. But then very sadly, some of those special people disappeared from our lives. And I found it maybe more difficult than my husband, maybe because as women, we're more emotional than men. But it was something that we couldn't really understand at the time. But I do know that it's very common in that in our Angel Mum support group, a lot of the time we spoke about how difficult it was to try and maintain relationships with some friends, or how hard it was to experience the loss of their friendship. So it is a common thing, but we didn't know. We weren't expecting that. So I just want to talk for a little while about why that possibly can happen. And I think the first thing is that
when you experience a loss, you change. You have to change who you are, because there's so much new ideas and new things that are coming at you. And I think that our friends and family, or people whose relationships we lose, are expecting us to be the same, and we can't. Okay, we can't be the same because there's so much newness in our lives. The second thing that applies particularly to a loss of a child is that people seem to think that the loss of a child might be contagious. So if it's happened to Mike and Sherry, well, if I am with them, or if I have contact with them, maybe it'll also happen to me. So as unrealistic or irrational as that may sound, I think it affected a lot of people in that way. The third thing is that because of our society and our approach to grieving and loss, we don't really know a lot about it. So the average person in the street actually didn't know what to say to us. And so it's much easier rather just to avoid us than to try and engage with us and maybe not know what to say. So the combination of people not knowing what to say and us as the mourners being very vulnerable, that combination is kind of the only result can be kind of a disastrous interaction between two people. The other thing that is possibly going to have a bit of an impact is that people tend to judge, especially those that haven't experienced the situation. And so they can judge what they feel we are doing maybe wrongly, and as a result of their perspective of what we are doing incorrectly, that can also affect the relationship. So if you are caring for someone who's in the mourning process, one of the things is please don't judge, because you don't know where they are. And even if you have experienced a loss yourself, you still actually don't know where they are. And lastly, there was a phrase that my husband coined called sympathy fatigue. And maybe people were just tired of hearing about how difficult our journey was and all our hardships. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, I do think that I made the mistake of flooding people. And eventually that just becomes too overwhelming. So people feel, oh, no, I can't cope with another half an hour of listening to all this terribly traumatic stuff. So therefore, they rather just peel away. What also happens is that in the case of a loss of a spouse, what is a very common thing is, and we have a friend of ours' parent suffered from this when her husband died. The group of friends that had been friends for years and years and years suddenly cut her off because she was no longer part of a couple. She was left out of the Sunday lunches and the things that they always used to do together. And that is a very real issue for when you have lost a spouse. So what I'm talking about here is we have loss on top of loss. So we have the loss of the friendships or the relationships with family members on top of the bereavement, on top of the death of your loved one. So it's impacted and compacted and makes it very difficult. So what we really wanted and needed initially and over the next few months was normality from our family and our friends. We wanted to do normal things because we were feeling far from normal. Our whole life had been turned upside down. We had embarked on a very shattering journey. And we needed the normality of being invited to a braai, of people popping in and having a cup of coffee. And that didn't happen. So instead of us experiencing normality and trying to re-engage in our normal lives, what happened is we found the grief journey to be incredibly isolating, and we were kind of left to deal with it on our own. I do need to say here that my sister-in-law was amazing, and I certainly never felt alone totally alone in our journey. She phoned me probably every day for a whole year just to check that we were okay. So it wasn't that we were completely isolated, but we were people that we were thinking we could share our journey with, we couldn't. So some of the relationships over time and with a lot of effort from Mark and I did eventually recover, and some never did. And even to this day, we're very saddened by the loss of relationships with family and friends that we had before the loss of Kerry. The second unexpected difficulty that we had dealt with our relationship or our marriage. And especially in the loss of a child, this is a very real difficulty. And we were expecting a little bit of hardship, but we didn't realize quite how hard the road would be. So when we experienced the loss of our daughter, we were expecting that as parents of Kerry, in other words, two people suffering the same loss, the loss of our daughter, that we would be able to support each other in the journey. And that's not necessarily the case. We have to do our own personal grieving journey to move towards healing. We can't rely on each other to heal us. So even though you are expecting a lot of support and understanding, maybe you won't get that from your spouse. Maybe because they can't give it. They don't know how to give it. So that for us was quite a learning curve. The figures that are bandied about, particularly after the loss of a child, regarding marriage and divorce, is that between 70 and 90% of couples who lose a child end up being divorced. And that was certainly the figure that I knew 16 years ago. And I remember sitting on our veranda and saying to Mike, that will never happen to us. It won't happen to us. We've got a good marriage. Well, those words I was proven to be wrong with that. We did have a lot of difficulty. And but getting back to the statistics, the actual statistics, which come from a survey done by the Compassionate Friends in 1999, was that the divorce rate is only 12% in couples who have lost a child. And of that 12%, only 1 in 4 said that the divorce was directly related to the loss of their child. Okay, so Mike and I nearly became one of those statistics. And it would have been directly as a result of the loss of Kerry. Because prior to the loss of Kerry, we were very blessed to have a very happy, very peaceful marriage. And then what happened after the death of Kerry was that Mike went into dysfunctional grief, probably within about 3 months of the death of Kerry. Not that we knew that at the time. We didn't even know there was such a thing as dysfunctional grief. And just to remind you, the dysfunctional grief that we discussed about 2 sessions ago is when you are doing something to harm either yourself or other people because of maybe your faulty thinking with regards to the grief journey. Often this dysfunctional grief happens as a result of not knowing what to do, feeling completely overwhelmed, feeling at sea. And then often we behave in ways that are normally not how we would behave. So these difficulties between a husband and wife often do arise. But it doesn't mean to say you have to end in divorce. And one of the reasons that's bandied about is that men and women grieve so differently. And that's why there's such a high divorce rate, particularly with parents who've lost children. Well, hello, the fact is that men and women do lots of things differently. And that's actually what keeps us together, is the differentness of each other. So personally, I don't believe that the difference between how men and women grieve is a contributing factor. What I do think is important is that very often the one member of the couple might choose to heal and the other one not. Or they may be at very different levels in their healing journey, so there's a lack of understanding of where each other is. Also, it doesn't actually matter what the reason is for the problems in marriage. The bottom line is that when we are under stress, we disintegrate, and I love that word. We disintegrate into our shadow personalities. In other words, that's the dark side that we all have, that none of us want to admit to. So when we experience stress, we go into that shadow side of our personality and we relate to people from that dark place. So when you have two people, in other words, mother and father, relating to each other, both from the dark place, it cannot be good news. So let me get back to the personal story. So after many years of our marriage kind of being attacked every which way, after about 10 years, Mike actually finally started to deal with the death of Kerry. And since then, he's been completely amazing. He changed his mindsets, how he views things. I know that a lot of things were very uncomfortable for him to embrace. But what he did is he had the courage to embrace the changes that the journey of grief was causing within him. In other words, he was opened to the weathering. He was, in other words, harnessing the hardship and changing his ideas and his thoughts as a result of that. So he's really been absolutely incredible in this journey once he became conscious and realized what was happening. So if you are having difficulties within your marriage and you do love your spouse, I urge you to never, ever, ever, ever give up on them. My prayer is that hopefully they will come to a time where they also become conscious, and then you can start working on your marriage together. So if something is really worth fighting for, then it's worth fighting for, okay? So if you value it, you're going to fight for it and make sure that you do that. My personal belief is that if two people really want to resolve their relationship, it doesn't matter what has happened. If the two of you possess the desire to heal, that will happen. So please don't give up if you are having difficulties in your marriage. So in retrospect, one of the things that we realized was an issue for Mike was that he, as the dad, as the protector of our family, as the one who keeps us safe, he had promised Kerry that she would be okay after her op. And patently, that didn't transpire. And even though his promise came from the very best place, with the very best intentions, what happened, because he was the dad, because he's the protector, that comment made with such positivity and care became toxic. And his feelings were, if I can't honor the promise I made to our daughter, how can anyone take my word as my bond? And so that very little comment, which I'm sure I would have made as well to Kerry, was the thing that started or catalyzed the journey into dysfunctional grief. So you might have had a similar experience of some little comment or little experience that can just start you on the wrong journey. So that is the second difficulty, was the difficulty we experienced in our marriage. However, I would like to say that we've both worked very hard, and we are now in a marriage probably better than the one that we had before Kerry died. We're in a placid, peaceful, calm place. And so if we can do it, you can do it as well. The third difficulty that we faced was something that I could spend a lot of time speaking about, but I probably won't. It was very unexpected because we found the religious community to be quite difficult to deal with. And before I start speaking about that, if you should have any particular comment that you'd like to make or difficulty that you experienced, please feel free to add it in the comment list below, or possibly drop me an email on Sherry, spelled CHERRI, at lifevision.co.za. So that's Sherry at lifevision.co.za. I would love to hear about the unexpected difficulties that you have faced. And we welcome Julie to join us this morning, a very loyal supporter. Thank you for your time. So moving to the third difficulty, unexpected difficulty, which was to do with the religious people in our lives. When you are confronted with a long-term and very severe trauma, there's no ways that you know whether your faith will be strengthened or whether it will be lost. And we found that we were judged by a lot of people, once again, who haven't walked the journey, and therefore doesn't give them the right, I don't believe, to judge at all. But we were kind of found wanting because maybe our faith had been wobbled. Maybe we were questioning things that they didn't feel we should be questioning. So Mark and I are actually perfect examples in our relationship. So my faith, which had always been quite strong, was strengthened and broadened to embrace things that maybe I normally wouldn't have entertained, and now I do as a part of my spiritual practice. Mike, on the other hand, lost his faith completely. And in that, there's no judgment. It's just acceptance of that is the way it is. And so we have to work around the fact that I do have a spiritual practice and Mike doesn't really believe. And it's okay. It doesn't mean to say that if you don't have a Christian spouse, that your marriage is going to fall apart or that your relationships are going to fall apart. So, having covered the unexpected difficulties we experienced, in other words, the change in relationships of family and friends, the fact that our marriage took a lot of strain, and the fact that the religious community was a disappointment to us, not all of them, but many of them. Those are just three of the difficulties, and they were the major unexpected difficulties that we faced. So I ask you to carry on the conversation that we have started and start speaking about the difficulties that you might be experiencing. Share with the group on Facebook, or as I say, send me an email, and let's continue the discussion. I also ask you to please share this video if you think it'll be of value, and to thank those of you who have shared my videos. I have been absolutely gobsmacked at how many people have viewed these videos on grief. And so we are starting this community of shattering the silence on the taboo topic of grieving. So as always, I thank you for your time this morning. I welcome your comments. And also I will probably do about 2 more of this live Facebook series on grieving. So if you have a particular topic or particular question that you would like me to address, please feel free to be in contact with me, and I'll do my best to make sure that we include it. So thank you once again for your time. I really do appreciate the support that I'm getting from many people, many that I know and many that I don't know. So people like Barb's Talyard, who is an extended family member. She's a very loyal supporter and attends most of these videos. Thank you for your support, and you amongst many others. I hope that that this has maybe put your mind at ease a little bit, or if it has raised questions, let's talk about them. So thank you once again, and I wish you a very good week. Bye.